Top of the middle of the day to you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're at the bench inside the shop for another little narrative session. Today, for your viewing pleasure, we're going to be taking a look at an ms362. This is the standard version, as you can see from the high, low, and idle adjustments on the side of the cylinder cover, but throwing the disclaimers out right off the bat. Narrative, long, tedious if you're not a knuckle/gearhead like me, interested in what makes these things tick internally. I may slammer my speech in this process. Please forgive me. That's a combination of slur and stammer. I made that up. I figure presidents can make up stuff as they go along. I might as well be able to as well. What the heck? I'm only human, make mistakes in this process. Check the description for any clarifications and or qualifications or corrections, because, again, sometimes we make mistakes in this life. So, we're going to take this thing apart, I guess, take a look at what goes on and see what happens, I guess. I never really thought for a second that there were going to be as many people out there like me that were interested in what happens on the inside of these particular machines. Stihl went to the one-piece cylinder cover design after they went kind of away from it in the early part of the 80s when the 048, 038, they came out around 80, maybe even late 70s. They were going away from the single style heavy metal designs like the 56. Well, technically it was a 45, and the 050, which was the predecessor to the 051, 075, yada, yada, yada. Started changing. Now they're kind of going back the other direction. I guess I found that interesting. That's why I mentioned that. I've snibbled about the handlebars on these things multiple times. They are the antithesis of the KISS method, where KISS is an acronym, stands for Keep It Simple Stupid. I like that kind of concept. I'm a simpleton by nature, I guess. And definitely appreciate the concept of you don't have to do a whole lot of monkey business to take something. If you're going to design something, you get carte blanche. Why would you design in something that makes it actually harder to work upon, dismantle, fix, pick something? Who cares? It doesn't matter at that point, I guess. Now, the handlebars are completely loose, except this situation down here is anything but fun to deal with. It's probably the worst I've ever seen in like the 661 kind of situation, maybe even 462. There's another saw that's out now that's not too bad, but you're kind of having to dismantle a lot of the accoutrements, if you will, to get this situation handled. Again, if you have carte blanche, why make it harder? Why not make it more simple to take apart? I would say it's probably a little stronger than what we've seen before in the past. The bolts go in this way. They're a lot further apart. A lot of the old saws, 46, 44, 66, had a pretty thin strip underneath the tank, and the bolts were relatively close. It wasn't necessarily stronger, I don't think. I think this system right here is actually more beefy the way it's designed. It's not easier to get apart, though, by any stretch of the imagination. I still haven't figured out the quick and easy way in all actuality. I have not actually done that yet. So I guess we're open to suggestions on that front. Yeah, it's just, it's not designed to be like a simple process to take apart, which is super unfortunate. One of the problems is this piece that's molded here, I'm assuming this is molded, it has some studs that stick through, bigger holes in the handlebars. Again, we'll look at that in a second if I ever manage to get this thing apart. Okay, I guess maybe we'll look at that. These go through, like I said, probably a little bit stronger of a system, but definitely a pain in the rear to get apart. Guys, to be careful with this situation. If you take that screw out, this little plastic, it's a stop, essentially keeps the handlebars from moving too far, resides in the side of the case right here in this recessed little hole area. I think we've talked about some of these saws before. They've switched to this quarter twist. Stihl recommends changing these out every 30 days. That's the factory recommendation. I know that plastic latch system gets pretty loose in some of the saws, and they've had a lot of problems getting that taken care of. So the rubber lip inside the filter seals on this area of the filter base right here. I'm not sure what they call that piece. I've never actually looked into that. But again, every 30 days. Now, you could probably oil this if you wanted to. I haven't really discussed that too much. I use PJ1 because it's super tacky. It even says so right there with some bling. But it's a light oil. It's not a heavy super tacky. It's a light super tacky. So it's picking up the particulates really well, but it's still light enough that's letting the air blow through. I don't like this. I like this company's HR1 mix oil a lot, but I don't like this version of filter oil because it's kind of like snot. There's a couple other ones. I use this on my K&N air filters as well because it's light like the K&N oil, but it's tacky, so it grabs stuff. Seems like it works pretty good. I've been running that mix oil. I've been running that filter oil since I ran some race bikes. We did motocross back in the 80s or whatever, and I actually used that starting in the early 80s in that application. So kind of transitioned over into saw application, and there you go. I'm not doing too good with that one. We got the escapee. So I guess I kind of like this system better than some of the other saws. It doesn't take a ton to get it apart, which is kind of nice. There's not too much going on. You got to be careful of the wires. They're actually really small. Maybe not quite as small as what we see on like the 661s, but that M-tronic system, they use really small wires, and so essentially you have to be careful you don't rip the wire apart inside of the plastic coating, because what happens is essentially you'll lose continuity and it becomes a problem. Again, we're like kind of impressive getting this situation apart here now. That's interesting on this one. Generally, the throttle linkage will kind of pop out of that little plastic lever. And this one's kind of struggling. I don't mind taking the rubber mounts that hold it stiff out and give it some room to maneuver in this process, because I'm kind of twisting and prying on stuff. There's your contact spring for the kill switch. You got to take that off to get the wire that it makes contact with loose. And then you have this other little wire here that's hanging in there. That's kind of impressive. And then you have this conglomeration happening. Again, we can see that there's stops on the needles. I don't know if you can tell, there's a super teeny tiny venturi where the charge goes through. Overall, the fresh air and the charge, quite a bit of volume gets in there, but not a lot of fuel necessarily. So again, we're stratification process. Even though this is a standard saw, they're using raw air to essentially burn off as much as the excess hydrocarbons as they can, trying to get to that perfect 14.7 to 1 according to theory stoichiometric relationship of air to fuel, where conceptually all the hydrocarbons get burned up in the process. I guess essentially not getting a bunch of hydrocarbons escaping out of the exhaust. I think that's conceptually the thought process. Now if we take a look at the back, we can see that process. The hole going in for the charge is actually smaller than the hole going in for the stratification process or the raw air. We are using a mini spark plug in this operation. The early versions of the 362 had a different fin cylinder configuration. The fins were more flat, looked more like a Husqvarna cylinder, and they actually had a 14mm plug. And even I think the early versions of the new design, where the cylinders has kind of a canted back fin design like this, supposedly it aids in cooling, they say. I think those early ones even had a 14mm, but then they changed to 10. I don't know why. I don't know why they did that. I haven't been able to get any kind of confirmation on that, I guess, at this point. I think we've kind of talked about some situation with this saw before. The front part of the card box is this plastic piece right here that we're going to take off in a second, and it is extremely lightweight. Like, it's extremely lightweight. They only weigh like a few ounces. bracket, helping with the process to keep the carburetor where it's supposed to be. Interesting. One of the things that I didn't actually mention, the screw in the back is actually covered up by the cylinder cover. So in order to take the recoil assembly or pull starter cover, however you want to reference this part right here, you have to pull the cylinder cover. So we look at the dual magnet system, north-south, but they're using that to monitor the speed of the crank. This is a limited kind of, it's actually a coil, it's not a controller because it's not running the carburetor. So a little more simplistic in design. You can see the ram air system. They kind of copied Husqvarna with blowing air that's a little bit more free of debris into the carb box for the air cleaner. So we kind of thought that was interesting. We have wires galore that are small. We're going to be careful taking that stuff apart. That was just a little more than finger tight, 4mm. Here's your direction finder for your fresh air, if you will. You can see the cavity, it stuffs it into the carb box right there. Now I think we're getting a lot closer to getting this situation with the carb box handled here. We'll take the casing off. So the muffler is a two-piece design on this version of the Pro Saw, which I actually really like. This front part is called the casing. They're maintaining a 4-bolt system of mounting the casing onto the muffler itself. Which is kind of nice. Stainless, so it's pretty much weightless. Also kind of nice. And we have the 2 bolts that hold the muffler to the cylinder, pretty standard. They aren't running a cooling plate in this system, but you can see the muffler's pretty open, but they have a little teeny tiny hole coming out of the exhaust. kind of a lot of monkey business, though, to get the cylinder off of the cases, because the intake manifold is mounted to the back via 4 little screws that you cannot access without getting some things loosened up so you can maneuver around a little bit. So we have a quad loop concept in both. We're feeding the charge and the raw air into the cylinder itself via quad loops, and you can see the upper ones, well, they're the lower ones technically, but fresh air is coming in on top right there. But we've looked at these before. They're super wide, and it's got actually pretty decent combustion chamber shape. We've looked at the exhaust being really wide, so it's wide. Duration's all right, I guess, but you can see it has 4 ports for the individual loops, so I'm thinking that that's kind of an impressive casting operation to get that handled like that. Certainly a lot more work than you see in normal circumstances where the 462, for example, has 1 hole in the center, along with the 461, 661. Both of those are really similar in design, at least as far as that goes. Again, little teeny tiny 4mm bolts holding the back of the manifold on, which is good. Weight savings is definitely a thought, consideration in this process, and then the manifold just pops off. But you can see it goes from round to kind of square. The raw air circuit goes from round to oblong, but the charges coming in, it's pretty small. That amount of surface area this way, volume-wise, it's kind of small, getting a lot of charge into the cylinder. So if we take a look at this machine, it was run at the factory, and then it was run in a little saw testing, and that is all. And we can see that it's got a pretty good amount of ghosting happening already. If we take a look at the back of the skirt, pretty interesting already. If we take a look at the front of the slug, we can see evidence of ghosting here and here as well. So I've talked to the tech guy a little bit, and they don't seem to be too concerned. It seems like they, being the engineering staff, are aware of that situation, I guess. It seems like they're aware of it. It doesn't seem like they are worried about it. But we can see, as usual, we have shiny spots over on this side, which means it's going to be a little more tight. If you look at the wear pattern already, like I said, did minimal saw testing with that thing, run only at the factory otherwise, and we can see much more shiny, 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 and then not so much on that whole opposite side. So I'm not sure what you were able to actually see out of that. You can see the shininess. Below my finger, below my finger, below my finger, lots of shiny. Look at the opposite side, we see not so much shiny. So something's happening in the casting process or something. I'm not exactly positive. I've never been able to, I'm not the one that you're going to get to talk to an engineer kind of a guy, and so yeah. So there you have it. We kind of took it apart, We were checking it out. We can see the reliefs in the crankcase right here that made up with the way they have the quad loops going on with that cylinder. And this is the dual dog. This has the big clutch cover, but for the life of me, I don't understand what they were thinking when they designed it to look like that. Yeah. Have some obstructions happening in here. They're trying to get the sawdust deflected around the corner, allowing it to come off of the chain, kicking it out and going around. I'm assuming that's what's happening with that concept right there. Okay, so we took it apart. I bumbled along through the process, managed not to wreck anything, and now we're going to have to start doing some other work to this process. Alrighty, thanks for watching this session. Have a blessed day wherever you might be on God's green earth.